Amen. Okay. All right. I want to welcome Andrea back. Yay! And turn it over to you, Shanna. Go ahead.
So my devotional tonight is from my Bible app, and it's from a study or from a plan called Humankind. So it's a devotional on kindness, and it's called A Sacrifice Worth Making. One of my favorite scripture passages talks about what will be required of us if we choose to pursue sacrificial living the way Jesus did. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourselves long enough to lend a helping hand. Think of yourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave, became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process. What if the key to being brave and defying the divides that have formed in our families, our neighborhoods, our churches, and our friend groups has something to do with forgetting ourselves? What if we hold our stories with confidence and tenderness, appreciating what we've learned, but don't consider them or our values the most important thing? This is the journey of human kindness, knowing and loving ourselves fully and honoring the hand life has dealt us, emptying ourselves for others, seeing the fullness of joy and hurt and pain in every interaction, and then choosing to regard another with humility and selflessness anyway. I have a long way to go to live a life that reflects Paul's charge in Philippians 2, to extend kindness as he challenged in Ephesians 4. But the unity of our humanity, achieved not by our own striving, but because of a good God's perfect love and kindness towards us, is worth the continued pursuit. Because at the end of the day, we must ask ourselves, is human unity worth our sacrifice? Is human unity worth our sacrifice? I'm not talking about unity that is tolerant or fake, ignoring conviction and diluting identity. Mere tolerance and ignorance aren't kind. I'm talking about unity that rallies us together around our, that's something in Latin, I think, imago Dei, and calls us to pursue relational healing with a higher purpose, anchored by the freeing power of the good news of grace. After all, in the beginning, what united our humanness was that God considered it very good. And that is still true today. And then the verse along with that is from Philippians 2. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you not look to your own interest, but to the interests of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited. That's it.
Thank you, Shanna.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Shanna. Yeah, I'm impressed. You recognize that imago Dei as Latin. That's very good. Do you know what it means in Latin?
No, something God, I'm guessing, because it's...
Yes. Yeah, it refers to the concept, actually, we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, the idea of being in the image of God. So each of us bear that image. Remember what has Keller was kind of walking, was Keller or Crassi? I think it was Keller. Yeah, Keller was talking about the image of God, what it means for us to bear that image, or what it means for others around us to bear that image. And that's the Latin. So see how smart you sound just by throwing Latin around. It's good work. It's good work. Well, fantastic. Hey, so let's go ahead and jump. We're going to jump into tonight talking about biblical poetry. That's going to be our main focus. We will touch a little bit on Philemon and go through some of our things with the Moodle to make sure we're on the same page, because there were a few minor changes to the Moodle for us this week, so that so we don't leave you kind of confused or not sure what to do. But before we do, and I haven't had a chance to do any reading or looking at this, but I just saw it on the news. I was watching the news, evening news with my wife, and they mentioned there was a new discovery, or at least it came out. The discovery came out today. Did anyone hear about that? It was a discovery in Israel near Jerusalem. It was an ancient basket. I'm not sure. Again, I haven't read about it, so I don't know where they found it. But the interesting part of the discovery is that it's probably at least 2,000 years old. And in this basket, there are many fragments from various scrolls, writings, and such from that ancient Near East 2,000 years ago. And so there's many parts of it. They're referring to it as similar to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Again, something that probably is not on your radar much, but something from over 50 years ago. They discovered these scrolls in caves near the Dead Sea in Israel. And what they were able to do for us as far as biblical interpretation was important, because they were able to show us kind of what the biblical text looked like 2,000 years ago. Written in the ancient languages, mostly in Hebrew, although there were some Greek passages, and I hear today saying there's going to be some both in English as well as in Greek. And it just helps the interpreter, the people who put together the Bibles that you and I read, to know really what was more original, because we don't have, I mean, I wish we did. We don't have any original text. The person who wrote it, say, for example, the Gospel of Luke, we don't have Luke's text. We don't have that. We have copies of that text. But we don't have anything that we actually have Luke's fingerprints on and was written by his hand, or anything from Paul, or the Old Testament's even older. And so what this will do, it'll give us a chance to see, to kind of like turn the clock back, to get behind the veil and see what was in those ancient texts, maybe even more ancient than the ones that we currently can use to interpret and put into our language and use for our Bibles. So it's kind of a cool thing. I'm looking forward to kind of see how it's going to turn out. So maybe if you see it on the internet or watch it on the news, just kind of keep an ear out to see what are they finding. Are they finding, because it sounds like they're finding all kinds of different texts, and so they're having to go and try to match it up and see, well, is this something that comes from the Bible, or is it some other writing? Maybe it's somebody's shopping list from 2,000 years ago, or a text message from a husband to a wife, or whatever. We don't know exactly what all is in this, but we know that it's like 2,000 years old. So they're expecting, I think they found some pieces that we would consider biblical today, and some probably other pieces that are not. But it'll be interesting how that begins to play out, and if there'll be some kind of a cool discovery that comes out of it. Yeah, Terry.
Hey, I didn't get a chance to read it, but I think I saw it on the Facebook news little section. There's something on there about the discovery, so I'll have to go back and look.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah. I'll suggest you do that, because I haven't had a chance yet either. I'll as soon as class is over, I know what I'll be doing. I'll be diving into the internet to find out more about it, because it sounds absolutely fascinating. But it was about 5 minutes to 6 that I was watching the news, and they said, and I was like, oh, I need to know. We got to find out. But no, I'll wait till after class and see what they say, because I don't know when they discovered it or what they know about it yet. It may be a new discovery. They don't really know what all is there, or they may have had it for a while and now they're just revealing it because they know what is there and they know it's worth talking about. So we'll see. But yeah, if it's anything at all, even in a small way, similar to what they found, I'm going to say maybe it's almost been 60 years ago since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. That was really hugely significant. Not for the average Christian, not for the average person who reads the Bible, but as far as biblical interpretation and the confidence we have of knowing that we are really doing a good job of having something that we've handled the Bible well, that we haven't allowed it to stray from what it was originally, or how it is when we talk about it being God inspired, that we can have confidence that it hasn't just been watered down or manipulated by humans over the course of 2,000 years, because I think that's what people assume, that when people don't grow up with a reverence for the Bible or don't have that as part of their faith background, oftentimes they could say, well, that's just some book, and who knows, this probably changed, thousands of times over the course of thousands of years, so it really probably shouldn't be trustworthy. But that's kind of what these discoveries not only help give us more confidence in it, but also I think give others a chance to say, man, that's really pretty incredible. Maybe it even would cause someone else to be curious about the Bible and about what it has in the way of a message for them. So, but I thought it was cool, so I thought I'd just throw it out there. I'm going to bet we're going to find that somewhere in those texts there'll be pieces of the book of Psalms, and that's kind of our main focus for tonight, is the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms is an Old Testament book, but that's really it's an Old Testament collection. It's like a library of itself, or it's you think about you buy a book of poetry, and there's a number of different poems in that book. Psalms are kind of the same way. There's 150 different psalms that are contained in the Bible, all in the book of Psalms, and each one is a unit unto itself. And it's not a ongoing story. It doesn't, one doesn't build on the one before. There's no narrative running through it. But the book of Psalms, and you can see this in Fee and Stewart, it talks about it this way, that it becomes our response, or a human's response to God. So even though it is in the Bible, we think of it as being God's word. Often when we read the book of Psalms, we're reading someone else's thoughts about God, or someone else's expression to God, maybe a prayer or written to be a prayer for individuals or for groups. And so we can sometimes find some really interesting things that are said there. Some of it's not very, some of it might even be a little surprising about, I'm surprised God would do this or think this. Well, it's because sometimes that's how we think or how we do. And so it becomes just part of the challenge of reading the Psalms, is understanding their different part in a different way of interpreting. One of the interesting things, and I don't know if you've had a chance yet to see it, there's we start off this week on Moodle. There's 3 short, they're 5 or 6, 7 minutes long, Psalms on understanding biblical poetry. And this is kind of an interesting thought, but it's said in the video, and I believe it is true, that nearly 30% of the Bible is written in a poetic style. Now, that surprises us for the most part, because we don't think of the Bible being a book of poetry. And I think we intuitively understand that poetry requires us to interpret it differently than something that's not intended to be poetic. And so to think that much of the Bible is written in poetic form gives us pause when we think about how it is that we interpret. Now, just maybe show of hands. Have you had a chance to see those first one or all of those videos? Okay, Terry. Okay, most of you have. Good. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think they were really, really good as far as explaining. But the Book of Psalms is the most dramatic and complete collection, because it's all in that form or that genre. But you do find poetry in some really other surprising places throughout the Bible as well. And I know in that first video it referred to after the Exodus event, there was a story about how Moses led the children of Israel through the waters to freedom in the wilderness, out of Egypt. And then there's a poem. There's a poem that then picks up on that very same thing and kind of retells it in a poetic form. And you find that from time to time. It mentioned in the video that many times in the prophets, and we talked about the prophets last week, that they use a lot of things, both poetic as well as maybe just intentionally figurative language, metaphorical language, and that falls into that same type of poetic category as well. And then there's a few other places that we kind of read across, and we don't think of them as poetry, but they truly are. And so we'll take a moment and take a look at.
Yeah. I just give you this for free.
If you have your Bibles close at hand, let's just take a look. I'm gonna look at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, and I want to just read a piece that we often don't think of as poetry, but again, in the idea of biblical material, it is poetic in nature. So I have, here we go. So in Luke 1, that's on page 1868, there is a brief pause in the midst of the story that Luke is telling about the birth of Jesus. If you know the story, the Christmas story about the birth of Jesus, the pre-story in Luke 1, you know how this Luke 1 kind of opens up. There's it begins with the story of the conception of John the Baptist, kind of oddly enough. And there's a couple, Zechariah and Elizabeth, and then we get introduced to Mary, who has a confrontation with the angel, says she's going to conceive and bear a child even though she is a virgin. And so then we see Mary travel to go see her relative Elizabeth, and they have this interchange between the two women, both of them now pregnant, expecting these two babies. And then before the story moves on, there is a poem, and it's interesting that it just kind of drops a poem here in the middle of our little story, and it's but it doesn't call it a poem, but it says Mary speaks. But as you read it, you're going to hear it that some of the things that we were told in those videos about Hebrew poetry, some of the emphasis on how couplets work together, either in the way of emphasizing something or contrast. And you'll see that as we read through this song that Mary speaks or sings, that's exactly, from the video, that's exactly the type of thing that the video was talking about. So do I have someone who would be willing to read? Again, it's on page 1868. And we'll be reading verses 46 through 55. It's called the Song of Mary. Sometimes our versions refer to it as the Magnificat. And again, Shanna, that's Latin, okay? So you're going to be a Latin scholar tonight. And what that is just merely the opening word of the song. What our English versions start with, my soul magnifies the Lord. That's what Magnificat means. And so they just grab that out of Latin and they say, this is the Magnificat, which literally means this is just Mary's song, which begins with her heart magnifying the Lord. So, so that's where it begins. So who would read for me, beginning at 46 with "And Mary said," and then concluding with "to his descendants forever" at the end of verse 55.
I'll read the first.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Go ahead, Andrea.
So I'm reading 46 to what? I'm sorry, 55?
55. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Mary said, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. For he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed. For the mighty one has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and he has sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel for in remembrance of his mercy, accordance to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and his descendants forever.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so when I say that's a poem, it doesn't rhyme, right? I can't catch a real sense of meter that it says some. Now, see, the problem with meter in a poem for us is because we're reading in English today. None of these biblical poetry was written in English. And so even if it might have a meter in the Hebrew, it wouldn't ever translate that way for us in our English, because that would certainly be lost. Any type of rhyme, and I'm glad the biblical poets didn't use rhyme, because it would never translate as it crossed into different languages. But we do see, again, some of the things the videos talked about, and we see that really played up here. We talk about some of the couplets that is kind of a descriptive way of using this. For example, as you read for us, Andrea, in verses 52 and then again in 53, we see the use of these couplets where they're using opposing things or contrasting ideas. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. So you hear the contrast that is being used here. He has filled the hungry with good things and yet set the rich away empty. And so we see this again. There's just a lot of things like this. We'll see it again later on in the chapter. There'll be another poem dropped into the middle of the narrative, preparing for the birth of Jesus, and that'll be when Zechariah speaks, and he will have his song of praising God, but it'll be again in a Hebrew poetic form, very typical for this ancient Jewish culture that Jesus is being born into. So anything else that you saw or that you heard in the way of the coupling that we talked about in the videos that you see here in Mary's song?
I don't know if I really see anything, but I do know after watching those videos, it just gives me a better understanding of the poetry and just with Mary right here. So it's like, oh my goodness, wow, it really made a difference.
Well, yeah, Terry, thank you for saying that. That's what I hope, because I think most of us read this and we don't think of it as being, poetic in nature, yet that's exactly what it is. It's just we don't, as we're reading it as a narrative, say we just picked up the book of Luke and wanted to read about the life of Jesus, and we were reading Luke 1:1 through the end of the book, we probably wouldn't even notice that we're moving from narrative into a poem. But that's exactly what it is. It's just dropping a poem in there for us. But it does require, again, as we think about how do we interpret a poem, we need to be careful about, when we're interpreting a poem, it's not the same. We don't take it as literally as we do interpreting a narrative, because just the nature of poetry is going to be a different type of interpretation. And so even in the song, speaking of the lifting up and the laying low, the filling the hungry but sending the wealthy or the rich away empty, the sense of leveling the ground, of making things a little more fair, a little more even, is the point or the heart message that the writer wants us to get. Not so much the specifics, because again, the specifics in a poem are not the most important part. It's the ability of what is being painted, what is being depicted there for us, and that's how the poet works. And so we see that here in Mary, we see it here in Zechariah. We look back into the Song of Miriam back in Exodus, or so much of the prophets. The use of poetry does kind of set it in a little different level. So, but again, the main point for this week would be to say, but of all the poetry that we find in the Bible, the most dramatic place is in the book of Psalms, where we have these 150 different poems, prayers. Most of them originally were set to music. And even though we don't know the musical tune that it goes to, or we have different instruments today, we can really look at them and say they were intended to be a guide for our interaction with God. And so they're, again, different. It's not where we go to really mine for great theology, because more of it is a feeling of how that psalmist is speaking about his feelings as he's interacting with God at that time. But it is an important piece of our biblical record. And so I want to just touch on it. In Fee and Stewart, and you'll get a chance if you haven't yet seen it, you'll notice that Fee and Stewart does what many do. They begin to, because there's 150 of them, and there's really no way of categorizing them, we begin to clump them together. And you'll see in Fee and Stewart, they talk about, I think, 7 different types of psalms that you can find a category, and you can begin to order them in some way around the different types of psalms that there are. Oftentimes when we try to do that, I like that, but I don't care for their categories, and that's just me being kind of picky about it. What I would suggest, in fact, I'll share this with you. There's a maybe a little bit simpler way, and I like to think of the Psalms. Here we go. Where am I at? This is what I'd like to suggest we think about too. It's just when we look at the Psalms, to break them into 3 different categories. There are Psalms that we refer to as Psalms of orientation. This means when everything is going well, we find our footing in these Psalms. Psalms that talk about creation, we consider the world and our place in it, or maybe Psalms that refer to God's law, the Torah, his revealed will, Psalms that talk about wisdom, or narrative Psalms that talk about things in history, or Psalms of trust, in which we express our trust in God's care or in God's goodness. And we find that that helps us keep our sense of our orientation. Probably the best example of that, and I'll let you guys help me with this too. We're going to take a look at a few different Psalms, and oh no, let's not do that yet. Let's go to this. There are 2 other categories, and the first one is this. After the Psalms of orientation, there's also a group of Psalms that we refer to as Psalms of disorientation. These are Psalms, we refer to them sometimes as laments, when we express some sense of anger or frustration, maybe even a confusion about what God's up to, or when we feel that God is somehow not there. So if you're reading one of those Psalms, you're going to say, boy, that can't be true. That's not what I was taught in Sunday school. That's true. And it doesn't necessarily need to be true, but it may be how we feel at times. Say we're going through a difficult time. It feels like God is not answering our prayers. We wonder if God is even listening. How many of you have ever felt that way? Let's be honest. We can do that. God's okay with it. Because sometimes we get stressed, and that's kind of, those Psalms give those feelings voice. It doesn't judge us for feeling that way. It doesn't say that you're wrong, you're somehow a bad Christian because you doubted God, you didn't think he was responding, you questioned his goodness because things were so out of place. Sometimes when we have those feelings, we think, boy, if God knew what I really thought, he would be angry at me. But we see in the Psalms, because there are a number, almost a third of the Psalms fall in this category of being Psalms of disorientation, that not only does God know how we feel like this, but he doesn't want to put us down. He wants us to say this is kind of a normal place in the human experience. In our interactions with God, sometimes it feels God is distant, and worse, sometimes feels God is absent, or maybe even worse than that, it feels sometimes that God is against me. And when I feel that way, I can either say, well, then I must be the problem, or you can say that is simply how life is, and God invites us to come and express this frustration as well. And so we see Psalms of this kind of disorientation, whether it be the lament or these forgiveness Psalms, penitential Psalms, either for individuals or for the whole of the community, the church, the temple, the nation, whatever. And the final piece, and there are many Psalms that fall in this category, what we refer to as new orientation or reorientation. That says that there was a time when my life was upside down, but God came and rescued me. And so now I can give him praise because of what he has done. See, it talks about a time when the world was upside down, but now things are right side up because of God's goodness. And because they kind of do that, I once was lost, but now am found type theme, we refer to those. And there's a number of them, almost a third of the Psalms also fall in this category of talking about that reorienting of at one point feeling we had lost our way, or that we had been abandoned, and yet God came through and delivered us. And so we see there's a number of different Psalms that fall in that category, but generally speaking, that's how we would refer to them. So that being said, let me turn off this and come back to our group. I'm going to throw out for you to have three different people read three different fragments of a psalm. And as you do, we want to do a little deciding if we think this is a psalm of orientation, a psalm of disorientation, or a psalm of reorientation. And so to begin with, we're going to begin with the most famous psalm of all. Anyone want to venture to guess what is the most commonly known psalm out of the 150?
Psalm 23.
Psalm 23.
Oh, yes, Psalm 23. Yes, very good. You guys are right on it. So I want to read just the first few verses of Psalm 23, and then we will start with that one. That's a good example of one of these three, the psalm of orientation, disorientation, or reorientation. And then we'll talk about what do we think we see here. So if you can turn on page 800, or if you're working out of your phone, just type in Psalm 23. And we'll look at just the first 4 verses. There's a lot more to it, but we'll just do the opening part of Psalm 23. And again, remember, what we'll be looking for is to try to say, how, if I were to identify this, how would it be? Do I think this is a psalm of orientation that helps me know kind of where I'm at and where I'm going? Or is it a psalm of disorientation because the world is completely crazy and I don't know where God is, or maybe I'm angry with God? Or is it a psalm of reorientation that talks about coming through a time when things were really bad and somehow now God has come to the rescue? Those are generally how those work. So who would be my first reader reading Psalm 23, verses 1 through 4? Shanna.
Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me.
Good. Stop there. We could go on. It continues to be a great psalm for us. But if we were to try to put a category on this, what is the writer of the psalm communicating to us, and what do we receive from this psalm? Anyone want to suggest? Is this an orientation, disorientation, or reorientation?
Orientation.
Orientation.
What do you think?
Orientation.
Reorientations.
Okay, some people say it's reorientation because it talks about a shadowy, dark place, but I'm going to say it's an orientation because which is fine. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Let's go. And And again, is there any right answer? No, these are just how we try to put categories that we can fit these Psalms into. Yeah, but okay, so it starts off with understanding who he is, right? He is like a sheep under a shepherd's care. He has all that he has need for. He is lying in a green pasture beside still waters. It is painting a picture of a peaceful, calm, secure place that where he finds his soul restored. Okay, so that even if it's not as secure, even if he's in a dark valley, he is still not in a place of being undone. He's still not in a place of being overwhelmed by fear, because he is still properly oriented. God is still there with him, and he feels the Lord's presence like a good shepherd, which gives him his orientation. He understands kind of who he is in this world and how he's related to God. That's a perfect example, actually, of an orientation. We know who we are, whose we are, and how it is we are to approach life. Okay. Thank you, all of you, for your input, and Shanna for reading for us. Somebody just turn one page back. So on page 799, I'd like to read the psalm that comes previous to Psalm 23. And we're going to read the first, let me go 7. Yeah, we'll do the first 7 just because I don't know why, but we'll do 7 verses. Who would like to read Psalm 22, verse 1 through 7?
I can read.
Okay.
Is it,
Pia? Go ahead.
is it begin with the my God, right?
Yes, my God, yes.
My God, why you have you forsaken me? Why you're so far from saving me, so far from my cries of acquaintance? My God, I cried out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praised. In our ancestor put their trust, and you deliver them to you. They cry out and were saved. In you they trust and were not put to shame. But I'm worm and not a man, scorned by everyone and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hoard insults, shaking their heads.
Okay, that's enough. I don't think I can take any more. I'm getting depressed. Okay. Okay, so this psalm, is it a good example of a orientation, proper orientation, disorientation, or reorientation?
Disorientation.
Disorientation.
Yeah, disorientation.
Disorientation, okay.
Yeah, it's disorientation. You can hear it. You can hear that cry of this psalmist as he is trying to figure out why things have gone so badly for him.
Yeah.
Whatever is going on, he feels abandoned, he feels forsaken, he feels God is far from him and cannot even hear his groaning. And so, well, yeah, I'm not going to read it again because I will get even more depressed.
Yeah.
Like I said, like he's constantly crying. He is in a sense of just being, he knows that he could trust God, or he wants to trust God. My ancestors trusted God, but I'm not worthy of that. I am somehow lower than low. I'm somehow subhuman. And again, is this true? Is the person writing this, are they subhuman? Is it really a worm who is penning these words? Or is this a poetic, kind of a symbolic, metaphoric language for someone who feels subhuman? Yeah, clearly that's what's going on. Have you ever, and again, this is not judgment, but have you ever felt that way, that somehow your worth didn't measure up, that life was a mess, and the reason it was a mess, and God didn't seem to care, and the reason he didn't seem to care was because you weren't worth caring about. Maybe you felt that way. And so this becomes an expression, not of the reality that God doesn't care, but it becomes an expression of that emotion that sometimes we feel abandoned and we feel distant from God. And so it gives voice, and I think a little bit of cover emotionally for the person who feels that way. But I wouldn't go around reading Psalm 22 every day. That wouldn't be my daily devotion, Shanna. I would stick with Philippians 2. That's a much better place to go. Now again, this becomes actually a fascinating psalm if you really want to take it to the next level, because these words like this, my God, why have you forsaken me? Maybe you've heard those words before, but maybe not in the context of Psalm 22. Where else do you hear words like that?
Isn't that what Jesus says?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Shanna, that on the cross, while Jesus was being crucified, we see that these words are spoken yet again, which raises up all kinds of interesting questions. Was Jesus feeling abandoned and forsaken, like his words say, or was he somehow referencing this piece of the Hebrew Bible in pointing people to what the message of Psalm 22 is? It's kind of an interesting thing for us to wrestle with. You know, what was going on in the mind of Jesus? What did Luke intend for us to think, or excuse me, what did Matthew want for us to think by including this as part of the gospel story about what Jesus spoke while he was on the cross? But again, most of us, or many of us as 21st century North American Christians, may know these are the words that Jesus spoke, but we may not know that it's connected to part of the ancient Jewish story of Psalm 22. So anyway, kind of an interesting little note. Go ahead.
Yeah, can this song, like, you know, say 22, can it be kind of both? Because isn't there towards the end a little bit more of a positive? You know, the main part was, you know, a negative, but I think I've seen more positive, like in the end of different songs.
Yeah, and a lot of them do. And Psalm 22 has a little blip of coming around, but it's not real clear as oftentimes they are, Terry. But this one does, and I think that's what makes the interesting question about, is Jesus feeling that same abandonment on the cross, or is he referencing Psalm 22? Because when we get to the end of Psalm 22, you'll see that you know, prosperity will serve him, future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has done it, or he has accomplished it. Which again, one of the things that Jesus says from the cross in the Gospel of John is, it is finished, which kind of almost is a reference to that last line of Psalm 22. You know, so is that something? Because sometimes we do see that new orientation or reorientation coming out. But this one stays. I mean, if you want to read it, it is actually striking how it describes what we see happening to Jesus on the cross, which is kind of one of the interesting pieces of Psalm 22 as well. But there's a whole lot of other imagery, again, poetic, that sometimes we don't understand. But again, there's some profoundly metaphoric language and also descriptive language of what the experience of the crucifixion will be like as Jesus moves to that. But we see it referenced 1,000 years previous here in the Psalms. Okay, one last song, and I think we're moving towards, this is going to get, if we're doing a multiple choice, the third option is going to be pretty easy, being there's only one option left. But let's go ahead and turn to Psalm 40 just to get a feel for our third and final type of category here of Psalms. And we'll read Psalm 40 verses 1 through 5. Okay, so who would be my final reader here for Psalm 40? That's on page 815 if you're using your red Bible.
I can read it.
Okay, thank you, Robin.
Okay. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the desolate pit, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Happy are those who make the Lord their trust, who do not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after false gods. You have multiplied, O Lord, my God, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts towards us. None can compare with you. Were I to proclaim and tell of them, they would be more than can be counted. They would be.
Okay. Stop there. Thank you, Robin. So Psalm 40, I think you probably know what I'm looking for here. Orientation, disorientation, or the reorientation.
I think it's reorientation.
Pia, you are my new star
Yeah.
student. Thank you very much. You nailed it.
Yes.
But why would we say that? It's the way it opens up, isn't it?
It seemed like he's happy. He received, or he got the answer that he needed. So I think it's good.
Right. So as opposed to Psalm 22, where he is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from the sound of my groanings? Here instead, he says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he did. He inclined to me and heard my cry. So he's saying God heard me, which again assumes there was a time when he had to cry out to God, but God did hear his cry. That verse 2 is probably the most striking piece of that reorientation, though. You know, that talking about a time when he was in a desolate pit, or Robin, as you said, in a miry bog. We don't have bogs around here in Merced County, but it's a phrase for a type of kind of a wetland that would be sticky and difficult. You could step into it and maybe get stuck in it. And so that's what we're referring to here, a time or a place in his life where he was stuck in a miry bog, where he was left in a pit and he had no way out. It was desolate. And somehow the Lord took him and set his feet upon a rock, allowing his steps, instead of being insecure, now his steps are secure. So you can see this, both the metaphorical language, you can see the way he's using the couplets here, the idea of from the pit he is put up onto the rock, from the miry bog he is put in a place where his footing is now secure, not stuck or trapped in the bog. So you see the poetic nature of it, but describing a time where the psalmist is able to look back at a time in his life when things were desperate, and because he cried out to God, God answered, and now things are better. And so this becomes a psalm of celebration. And so that's why the reorientation. Before his orientation was upside down, he was in a pit, and now his orientation has been renewed, and he's in a good place with a new song now on his heart to sing for all to hear. And so this becomes, again, not to belabor the point, but as you read through various Psalms, you'll find many of them express lots of different types of emotion. And this just becomes kind of a little bit of a way to categorize how we can see them. But there's a lot to really walk through and wrestle with as we look at the Psalms. So, do we have any questions, either from the videos or any of the reading? Maybe Fee and Stuart does a nice job of referencing the Psalms, but maybe you feel you're pretty comfortable with it.
One question, Professor John. I don't know. It's just a question to ask for everybody. Why do they use a lot of these songs and poetry back then? Is it? I was thinking, if it's that important, why can't they write it into like a normal language so everybody will know? Instead of making to a poetry that people have to think about it into a song that people have to really think deeply to really get what the message is all about. Yesterday I told Terry, I read like 2 or 3 times, but I still have problem. I called Terry. I said, Terry, what is going on with me? I read like 3 times already. I still don't get it because I don't know what they try to say in the passage.
Yeah,
So,
and that's a very good question. I'll let someone else try to answer it. Why do you guys think? Why is poetry utilized here in the Bible? Wouldn't it be easier if God simply had been a little bit more direct instead of using both metaphorical imagery or poetic style? Well, I think part of it, Pia, I'll jump out and do the easy part, and then I'll let people wrestle with it. In the book of Psalms, which again is the majority of the poetry, but not all of it. Again, I think that's partly due to the fact that they were intended to be prayers prayed by the whole of the temple or all of the nation, and so they would do it not as an individual or speaking directly, but intentionally kind of to move into a way of prayer, maybe putting it to music so it becomes kind of song-like. And you know, when we do songs today, often if you just looked at the lyrics, you'd find them being more poetic than direct. It's just a different type of literature. But you're right, that adds another level of interpretation, which sometimes makes it all the harder for us to understand. So why? So what do you guys think? Why do you think that maybe up to 30% of the biblical material is done in a poetic form? Or what's the advantage or disadvantage to that?
I remember part of it that we read about was because the poetry helped them remember to remember like prayers and stuff like that. So that's the part that I remember reading about. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think there's a couple of things. One is it becomes a memory device. But even in one of the videos, I think it was the first one, when it mentioned how in Exodus it talks about the children of Israel coming through the water, but then it has a poem which kind of says the same thing. And again, one sounds very straightforward, and some of us like straightforward. But then the next one was just very imaginative and very, in a way, almost more engaging, maybe engaging beyond just our mind, but maybe even engaging at the heart level. And sometimes poetry or music has a way of doing that for us, maybe unlocking it so it's not just what we think. Go ahead, Terry.
I know in that video I wrote down that they said it, like the example with where it's narrative and then it goes into the poem, that it's meant for you to ponder. So you go back and you know what God's done, but then I guess you ponder it and imagine it in your mind, help you remember.
Yeah, there's a lot, and I don't know, we actually are going to find a reason. Why did God do this, or why did the ancient writers do this? I don't know.
And
But
yeah, and
yeah,
even,
it
no.
adds a layer of challenge, but you're right. But then maybe it also takes it and gives it an extra layer of impact if we're able to get, you know, to that below the surface, like Terry was suggesting.
Yeah, and not even just me, but watching the clip that said reading the Psalms, and at the really end, he also, the narrator, the person who wrote it, he also say that it's not easy to just read it one time, and
Right.
you have to be like a lifetime to learn. It take a lifetime, very slow reader to learn this kind of thing. And that's why I was thinking to myself, why do they have to make it so hard and so difficult? Is it because they don't have paper and they try to, you know, some people study like shorthand writing, so they'll make it, they make it so that they don't have to use a lot of paper, and then put into a poetry so that it's easy to, I mean, it's a small writing, but it have a lot of meaning in there. So I was thinking, man, what is this? It's interesting, but it's hard. It's very hard to understand. Sometimes it says something, but it means a different thing too. So it's nice. It's nice that it's not just me. I mean, even though the guy in the term that it's hard.
Yeah, even the Bible teacher who did the video was saying it's hard. Yes, and but you know, you raised a good question there too, Pia. I appreciate that. These Psalms were written, say they began to be written probably by King David, and he lived at roughly 1,000 years BC. Many of them, as the videos pointed out, were written by others. Maybe about half of them written by others over the course of the next 500 or 600 years. So, but at that time, you know, everybody didn't have their own book of Psalms in their back pocket or have it on their bookshelf because they didn't have books like we have today. They didn't have a printing press, and many of them didn't know how to read. You know, so it becomes, in a pre-literate society, in a pre-printing press society, you know, how do you do things in ways that are maybe a little bit more memorable than just what we would do for that purpose, and knowing that you may not ever get it all, but over the course of your lifetime, you're going to get enough. And so you just keep working it, and let it just kind of, you know, steep on you and keep surrounding you.
Cool.
Yeah, no, it is cool, and it's
Thank
kind of a good way to look at it. Yeah. Well, good. Okay. Then I guess wrapping up tonight, I just want to touch on a couple more things, and one is from the Moodle. Make sure we're all in the same place. There's one of the assignments, and most of them are pretty straightforward, but there is an assignment for us in, I can find it, extend this. Yeah, it's 4.5, and it's called One Great Person Project. This is a real simple little project. It really is very simple, but it requires you to talk to maybe 10 other people. And the question that you are to ask your 10 is simply this: who is a great person, or name for me a great person, so that you get a chance to get their answer. Maybe ask them some follow-up questions like, why do you think this person is great, depending on who they say. The reason I ask that, because it's going to kind of be a side-by-side. You see 4.5 is that One Great Person Project, and then 4.6 is a journal, which is going to look a lot at Fee and Stewart and some of the things that he's walking us through with how Jesus viewed greatness. But before you go into 4.6, do the 4.5 a little bit of examination and just ask people. If you can ask them that question without saying you're in a Bible class, that's even better. If they say, why are you asking me this? Say, I have a class at the college I'm going to, or something like that. But if you can do it without using the word Bible, that's even better. Because when you say, name for me a great person, and they say why, and you say, because I have got a Bible class and I want to know what people think who is great, then they're all going to say, you know what they're going to say? They're going to look for the perfect Sunday school answer. And they know, because it's a Bible class, they're supposed to come up with a Sunday school answer. What would be the perfect Sunday school answer for this?
Jesus.
Jesus, that's right. Yes, you went to Sunday school, Andrea, I can tell.
Once
So
or
you know,
twice.
yeah, once or twice. Good. Okay, well, you got the right answers. So if you can just say, just name for me a great person. And you'll be surprised. If you can do it by asking different people of different ages, it's even more interesting. And we'll talk a little bit about it next week, some of the different responses, because maybe you don't get a real wide variety. But you'll find some people are going to identify all kinds of different people. Sometimes they'll say, my mom is a great person. Or maybe they might say, my teacher is a great person. Or maybe they'll pick somebody that they don't personally know, but they know this person did great things. They'll say Martin Luther King Jr. was a great person, or Abraham Lincoln was a great person, or Donald Trump was a great person, or LeBron James is great. You know, you'll find people will make all kinds. If you just simply say, you don't have to even say great person, just name someone who is great. And because then they'll come up with all kinds of reasons of what helps kind of define for them in their mind what great means. And sometimes we do that in ways that say, you know, it's about character, or sometimes it's just in that they're better than other people at a certain thing. Or maybe that person has a lot of money, or maybe that person has a lot of power, or maybe that person has a lot of celebrity, but uses that celebrity for a good cause. It'll be interesting to see what people say when you say, name for me a great person, and maybe a follow-up is, why do you think they are a great person, or what makes them great, and see what they say. Then do a little, it's only like a one-page little essay to say, you know, these are the people I asked, these are the responses I got. And if you can do a little bit of analysis, you know, what, you know, do you see differences due to ages? You know, do young people tend to go this way? Do older people tend to go that way? Or just, what do you see? Are there any patterns beginning to come up about what people would just intuitively list as greatness? And again, doing that, not doing that in a way that says, define greatness for me, because that would be far too straightforward. But tell me somebody who you think is great, and then by what their answer is, we can discern something about what they think greatness means. Okay. So yeah, so that's the one great person project. And again, that's not in your syllabus, but it is in the Moodle. So please be aware of that. 4.5 is that. And then 4.6, again, just talks about greatness in a little bit different way. And again, that's using more some of our readings to help kind of guide that forum for us. And let's see. Oh, and then 4.7. This is returning back to our good friend Philemon. Remember Philemon and that letter we read last week. Letter from Paul to Philemon about their mutual acquaintance named Onesimus. So I want to invite you to read that again. And then there are 4 questions here on this historical context question sheet. And we have them here. We'll have a larger set of questions looking at it from through a different lens next week. But this week we want to start just wrestling a little bit more with the Philemon letter. And so look at the 4 questions and just answer them. Again, there's no specific right or wrong, but let the question kind of guide you to really wrestle with what you see in the text, and just put your responses to those 4 questions in that assignment 4.7. But hold on to that, or hold on to those thoughts, or write them down, or print it off for yourself and put it in the back of your Bible, because I'll want you to refer to that later as we start moving through into interpreting Philemon for ourselves. This is a good starting place, trying to get a bead on the historical context of the letter. And so because the signature assignment will be due in like, what, 3 or 4 weeks, we want to get started on that now, starting to get that process beginning in your mind. So this is our first assignment that actually looks at Philemon and begins to ask questions and have you begin to respond to it. And then the final piece of the Moodle this week, you'll see the last thing in the bottom of the page is called an essay. No, it's not an essay. What am I doing? That is the essay of Philemon. Okay, there is a video at the bottom of the page. It's called Poetic Justice Video. This is purely for your enjoyment. There is no questions that you would have to respond to. There will be no points that you will get for doing it or not doing it. So if you choose not to, there's no downside to it, except I think you would find it engaging. It was a student, I can't remember her name, but she was a student at Calvin College, and this was part of a project she did of taking some of the poetic nature of the Psalms and the way it is expressing emotions or feelings from the human heart, conditions that we're in as we then bring them to God. And then she took that and gave it some contemporary perspective. She has about 6 or 7 different characters that we meet in these little short vignettes as they express their emotion to God, as if the Psalms were being written today. It's really kind of fascinating and kind of fun. But again, that's kind of just an extra add-on. If you've got an extra 20, 30 minutes to watch them through, I think you would find them all being rather thought-provoking about what does it mean for us to be living the Psalms out even today in our various different contexts that we find ourselves in. Okay.
Yeah, I watched them yesterday, and like I told you guys, I only understand like 30% or 20% of them. the way they express is like totally, it's in different verses and different psalms, and I think they're still using, even though it's contemporary people or saying today, but I think the word they're using still back. Still
well, it's still very poetic. It's still absolutely.
Poetic.
Yeah, so they're keeping that part of that psalmic nature of being poetic, but they're making it, it's how many of us know King David or can relate to King David, but maybe not. But these are present day people, and maybe how they would express those similar feelings. Awesome. So yeah. But I think it's really fascinating. Terry.
Hey.
I got your email.
Yes.
About 4.3 and 4.4.
Yes.
So what?
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Heads up. If you're tracking this, you'll see that there was a 4.3 that is not on your Moodle, and there is no place for you to do that assignment. Part of that was because it was part of our discussion tonight about the Psalms, and I was just going to do that personally rather than have you do it online by yourselves. And so there is no 4.3. So if you really want to follow through on the numbers, just know that this week there is no 4.3. And 4.4 and 4.5, they don't match what it says in the syllabus. One of them is mismarked if you were looking at the syllabus, and the other is not in the syllabus. And again, that has to do with the great person, because again, it's just a way of underlining, maybe a little better way than what the original syllabus had. It's a better way of underlining, I think, that idea of what does it mean to be great, and then setting us up to wrestle with the question, what did Jesus think about this issue of greatness? And that'll be part of Fee and Stewart. So I would suggest that you just follow along with the Moodle this week when it comes to 4.4 and 4.5 and not worry about if it doesn't line up. Terry?
Okay, so unless you changed it today or something, 4.4 was the literary genre of the Gospels. That was the assignment when you click on it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no directions to it.
Oh, on 4.4, there's no directions. Thank you for
Right.
pointing that out.
And the discussion, poetic justice, that's still closed, saying that we need to be assigned to a group.
Okay, well, hang on a second. I just lost you guys, and I'm going back into my Moodle because it kicked me out. I hate it when it does that.
Shanna, I think 4.3 is that poetic justice forum.
Yes, yes, I think that was 4.3.
Okay.
Oh, and I was going to talk about that decentering thing, but I won't do that tonight. That you do get a little bit of that from Keller. Okay, so 4.3. Are you on, Shanna? Are you on? No, 4.3 was a talk about laments and disorientation. So yeah, I'm not sure. Poetic justice.
So we're not doing the forum on poetic justice.
No, and it's there on Moodle?
It's still there on the
Sure enough is, isn't it? Okay. Well, I'm going to take it away. You don't need to do that. That's and again, that was a leftover, looks like, because we have another 4.4. And that is the literary genre of the Gospels. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that 4.4 that you see, poetic justice, will go away.
Yay.
Okay, and so Terry, go take me back one more. Which one was not, there was no direction for, or was that the one?
4.4, the literary genre of the Gospels.
And there's no, okay. I will look at that and I will get that square. That should be easy enough. And if it's not there now, it will be.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Shanna, for pointing that one out. I'm going to, you won't see that one anymore. Once you refresh, that first 4.4 is not going to be there. And the second 4.4 will have directions.
This week.
It seems like a lot, doesn't it? Yeah.
Reading.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of reading, and that's part of why I took out the actually the other assignments were long videos and some extended work, and so that's why we did a little bit of reworking in the middle there. I'm sorry for the confusion. Okay, yeah, I see there isn't. Okay, I will get that up, Terry, soon as we're over with class. I'll have 4.4 completed in there for you. Okay. Okay, well, I'm gonna come back here to my Zoom. There you guys are. Okay, so any other questions from you tonight? Otherwise, I'm going to say let's wrap it up, and I'll get back into my Moodle and take care of that for you.
I don't have any more.
Okay. Pia, you good?
I'm good.
All right, Andrew,
Right
you
now
good?
it seems, yeah, right now it seems like I'm good, but when I work alone, that's what
Yeah.
the problem.
Well, and that's part of it. That's why I'm really glad we can do Zoom though, because at least we can kind of catch up with each other and help each other kind of sort this out, because it's much better when we can do it together.
Yeah,
So.
because when I was together with the cohort and you, it seemed like I able to navigate and little by little, but when it's just me on the desk and try to figure things out, it's just a little bit tough for me.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I'm there. Slow, but I'm getting there.
You are getting there. You're doing good too. So, okay. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much. And I'll be praying for our list and anything else going on. Shoot me an email if there's anything else I can do or anything else I can be praying along with you for. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. You're very welcome. Okay. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
soon then. Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Have a good night.